Hi, my name is Douglas Clark. I'm a 57-year-old licensed architect that has been in custom home building for about 22 years now. Probably a little longer than that. I built my first home in 1996, and I grew up in a family of carpenters turned general contractors. So my grandfather to my father to myself. My degree is from the University of Illinois. It's relevant because that takes us to Chicago. So I cut my teeth on 17 years of early career in the Chicago area. And today we're going to talk about new triple Wythe brick masonry structures. So a resurgence of classical forms of architecture is taking a foothold around the world, Europe and America and other places. We are in Kyushu, Japan. Here we have a large, what we'll call amusement park, but it's a theme park bigger than Tokyo Disney, called House Tenbos. And it is a full-scale European village reconstructed, bigger than a village. There's a river with gondolas and there's towers, and you can look it up on the internet. So there's a resurgence in classical forms of architecture. However, a lot of this is taking place without the professional mentorship process that I, as a young architect, went through for more than a decade in Chicago. In that, when I was in my 20s, gentlemen in their 50s and 60s were teaching us the right way to do things based on historical precedent. So what we're looking at today is a Twitter post by some very popular people, and the two main Twitter bylines are Build Culture, these folks here, and the folks at 1,000-Year Home, with a 1,000-year home. I'm a follower to both of them. I've had a few interactions with both of them, but we're going to look at some of their homes today. So this is I'm going to back up one frame from here. This is a development in Oklahoma. It's on a lake. And we're going to talk about these brick homes and what I see as a 30-year veteran licensed architect growing up in Chicago brick culture, where the structures I worked with dated from the 1890s to the 1920s. And what I see in these beautiful homes, I have to admit, these are lovely designed homes. They followed some excellent cues from both European and other areas in American architecture, but kind of like that guy and that little kid in that movie, I See Dead People. I see construction defects, and they're not going to reveal themselves right away, but I'm going to talk about them, and it's not going to be beautiful. So there is a basic code requirement that your siding material needs to be out of the ground at least 8 inches. And that's typical for homes like these homes over here on the left, these wood frame homes. So what we're doing here is we're bringing structural brick masonry all the way down to grade and below grade. And in Chicago, we have a lot of brick foundations, many, thousands, hundreds of thousands. And in every single one of my gentrification projects with those, they had to be largely rebuilt. They had to be tuck pointed. My structural engineer taught me skip patch method, where we'd go down in the basement, cut out the foundation, cut out the slab, not the foundation, cut out the slab, dig it down to full depth, and cut out a 3-foot section, leave a 3-foot section standing, cut out another 3-foot section, and then when that's cut out, you fill it in with concrete. And then once that concrete cures for 28 days, you cut out the remaining brick and fill that in with concrete. Some of my contractors got creative, and when they would shore that up, they put in a hydraulic pipe jack, and they would leave it. They would sacrifice the pipe jack and pour concrete all through it, which I thought was kind of novel. And it was, they would support it with a piece of plate steel and go for it, because below the frost line, the old Chicago common brick would deteriorate over time. Freeze thaw is tremendously hard on building materials. So I'm bringing that knowledge and a lot of other aspects of masonry construction historic to my review of this frankly gorgeous, beautiful design. I love the design, but I don't. I have some serious reservations from real world experience. So it appears the brick stops right here, and then we pick up concrete. And that's good, so hopefully there's not much brick below the frost line, but it is Oklahoma, and I'm expecting snow and freeze thaw at least 3 to 4 courses a foot above the deck, and so I see those being impacted over time. I'm going to go take this detail a step further and jump over to these photos right here. When you look at this brickwork, when you look at this brick masonry, this would never pass muster for inspection in Chicago. That kind of sloppy brick joinery, even on the side. So in the traditional brick buildings, the fronts were ornamental fired brick and very nicely done, and the sides and backs would be what we call Chicago Commons. These rougher, looser sort of bricks that are, and the masonry work was not quite as good, but not this bad. Like, see these gaps and holes? That's where moisture gets in. And freeze thaw will get into that. And freeze thaw destroys building materials because freezing water crystallizes and expands, and water permeates, completely saturates mortar. It doesn't happen immediately. It takes a decade or two or a little longer, and then we end up having, when we remodel and gentrify these buildings, they would all get tuck pointed. Tuck pointed means you come with an angle grinder, you grind all these joints out, and then you refill about 1/3 the depth of the brick, and then you fill it all back in. And a lot of times when you're doing that, you find the mortars turn to sand. Another demonstration was I was teaching design build one summer at Judson College in Elgin, and I took a wheelbarrow full of the Chicago Commons bricks, and I'm not saying these are Chicago Commons. There seems to be a mix, and some of these are good fired brick and some may or may not be, so I'm not accusing them of using the Chicago Commons bricks here. But that wheelbarrow full of Chicago Commons bricks I left out in the weather from November to March. And we started with a stack of bricks, and there were bricks I took off another job site of a project I was actually building. There at the very end, I asked the masons if I could have some other leftovers, and they said yes. When it rained in November and froze, and it snowed all through December to March, by April in the thaw, we no longer had a bucket of bricks or wheelbarrow full of bricks. We had a wheelbarrow full of sand, mushy clay mud, and some chunks of bricks that happened to have been above the water line of the bucket. They deteriorated in a saturated environment in one winter because they were completely 100% saturated. You'll get some drainage out of this wall, but I'm not seeing weeps. I'm not seeing what we would call little straw drain holes with sash cord. Used to be like a clothesline cord would stick out. And so at the course where we transition from concrete to brick, usually 8 inches up, like these last 3 would be concrete. At that last course, every couple feet you would see a little sash cord come out, and that cord was called a weep, and it would help wick the moisture out of a cavity wall or a triple Wythe wall. Don't see that at all here. I'm not sure how when moisture gets in. How does moisture get out? What happens to these walls over time? And so when I look at that, that's a concern. Already here, this development is just a few years old, and we're already seeing moss grow. And so this is the beginning of decay. I like it that they put in a little trench drain here. I love that. That's a great detail. I love the true brick arch detailing. I love their outriggers. I love their stone sills. I do not like the step back exposed brick tops. This was a major no-no in taught architecture, formally mentored and taught architecture. This is all shelves to get wet and wick moisture into the cavity. All of those are suspect. Let me go. So I'm going to continue up the building in the bigger photo. Inside, we can talk about that later. Some people really like the inside brick look. It's lovely in my opinion, but it has to be properly contexted. So I guess the first thing I would be concerned with is this stone sill a single piece or a continuous piece or 2 pieces that touch each other without an insulation gap from inside to outside? We have the same stone sills outside. Is that a cold conduit? When it's 0 degrees here, what does that do to the inside in Oklahoma? If this wall is a triple Wythe wall, what's the insulation in that wall? If it's uninsulated, how do they pass the building code for that? I don't know. But continuing up the building, we have this wood on brick contact. Once again, we have an overhang here, but we're going to get some driving rain. Rain's never perfectly vertical. Snow drifts and blows. It's going to get wet. That's going to rot. We can insert some photos of what we do in Japan, how this plinth, this block at the bottom, before you bring a wood post down, that plinth is done in stone. And off the shelf at the Home Depot of Japan, that thing is done in a block of concrete you can buy off the shelf for 20 bucks. So for 20 bucks, they could have avoided in America there's a proper standoff. Simpson Strong Tie makes a standoff that's code required between the post and the base. So I'm seeing lovely architecture without maybe the code scrutiny that you would have in other parts of America. I'm also looking at these planter boxes. We have no roof overhangs, which we'll talk about in a minute. And rain is going to come right down into those. Snow and accumulation of moisture. And I don't know where it goes. Hopefully there's a little drain out here. I guess that must be a little drain out here. But I'd be very concerned about how that was detailed, how that was flashed. Because all these bricks is a sea of joints and a moisture saturatable, highly absorbent. It's a sponge. Brick is like a sponge. It's going to soak up all the water. So really detailing that pan, and the reason I would say it's highly suspect is I do not see a flashing. We don't usually leave brick as the top course exposed. You would put stone over it, just like we have the stone sill. The top of those planter boxes and features like that around the building ought to be a contiguous stone material that's not going to degrade and not going to allow permeance of moisture the way these outcroppings are. I like that detail. I don't like the exposed brick top. I don't like that there's no roof overhang. You can look up, you can Google search, does brick need roof overhangs? And lots of articles will indicate that we don't normally do this. This is not mentored traditional architecture. I have no eave overhang. I have no gable overhang. These are a recipe for future degradation of materials by moisture and freeze thaw. And I know it's a modern interpretation of classic architecture, but it's neither authentic nor is it what we call best practices. Having an overhang is a good best practice. These exposed rafter tails with a little detail on it very much remind me of classic homes in Japan, so that's kind of cool. And you can find some of that stuff in Europe. It's not nearly as prevalent in the American East. We get more of it in Oregon, but that's a fun detail. I kind of like the detail. I like the hip combined with the gables. I like the curvy connection, the doweled connections here. So those are all wonderful little things. The design is truly lovely. I like the true arches over the windows. The tiny little divided light looks like true divided light windows. Those are lovely things. But the weatherization over time, again here at the top of the chimney, we see brick at the very top course and just a little sleeve cap for that corner wood stove we saw, right? So there's a metal pipe, it's a metal flue pipe all the way up. So another thing with the traditional brick buildings in Chicago, which we can take a look at in photos, but there were real masonry fireplaces, and this goes back to even the Eastern homes in the original 13 colonies back to the 18th century and earlier. The brick fireplaces engaged to the brick wall counteracted some of these problems with freeze thaw and moisture, because you were not only heating the room with the stove, you were heating the entire wall, and that prevented cold spots. And so you'll see old traditional homes, and I can post some of those when we edit the video, of how the homes would have a fireplace on both ends, a chimney on both ends, and you would see multiple pipe stacks out the top, which meant they had a fireplace on the first floor, a fireplace on the second floor. And those were engaged, so the entire end walls of the house were contiguous with the fireplaces. and they would heat the whole wall. Frank Lloyd Wright was famous for putting these fireplaces in the middle of the homes. Roby House is like that. Kentuck Knob is like that. However, that leads to colder outside corners where the fire is not reaching out there as well. We heated and lived in a wood frame home from the 1920s in Oregon. We heated entirely with wood for 6 years. We installed a wood stove in the center, and in the direction we put there's an air distribution fan built into that steel box wood stove. In the direction of the air distribution, we got both radiant heat and air heated spaces. In the opposite direction, we got nothing. You would have to like direct a fan to push air back to the bathrooms in the master bedroom. So the center hearth concept is lovely in design, but poor in actual application for the uninsulated brick type structure. And so historically, whether it's the UK or other places in Europe, you're going to see these older brick structures with the chimney stacks on both ends and a long ridge line in between. It's a very common theme. And you may see some center chimneys as well, and there's useful to that in that space planning of the home. So I'm not saying don't have a center fireplace in a masonry home. I'm just saying there was a reason we did it otherwise in traditional architecture. But as I look at this, I see future weatherization, degradation issues. So again, like the way these mortar joints are done, just would not pass building inspection in Chicago. Maybe some other folks that have worked in Chicago can speak to. Maybe in the decades since I've been gone, standards have declined, and now all sorts of things fly that we didn't used to do. But yeah, those are some of my thoughts of these beautiful homes that I suspect will have issues in the future. I would say on a snowy, wet, freezing day, those brick steps are treacherous. And 1, 2, 3 steps. This has to count as a step. You need a handrail. That's a code violation right there. And if it's more than 60 inches wide, you need a pair of handrails. That's the code. So somehow they've managed to not need to comply, and that's interesting. Well, that's about all I have for now. Thank you.